and to everyone in the chamber for coming out on such a horrible night, and to everyone online for the good sense of staying at home. For the benefit of those watching on your YouTube channel, members of the committee are present in the chamber, and these members will be voting on proposals this evening. Other members of the council are also in attendance and or participating via MS Teams. They can take part in any discussions and they can ask questions, but they cannot vote. Your attention is drawn to agenda item 1, which sets out the guidance on how meetings will be conducted, including the ground rules. Before we start with the formal business, we will confirm attendance of voting members by doing a roll call. Would you do that, please, Victoria?
Thank you. Councillor King.
Present.
Councillor Bell.
Present.
Apology has been received from Councillor Bridge, who's been substituted by Councillor Banks.
Present.
Councillor Dalton.
Present.
Councillor Davis.
Present.
Councillor Hickmott. Not in the council chamber, nor is he participating in Teams. Councillor Hood.
Present.
Councillor Oliver. Apologies from Councillor Palmer. Apologies have been received from Councillor Roud, who's participating by MS Line. Councillor Tanner.
Present.
Councillor Thornywell. Councillor Williams, not in the chamber, nor is he participating at MS Teams.
Thank you, Victoria. I would now ask the officers in the chamber and online to introduce themselves, starting with you, James.
Good evening, members. James Bailey, Head of Planning.
Kelly?
Yep. Good evening, members. Kelly Sharp, Planning Policy Manager.
Do we have any officers online? You have Eleanor, please.
Good evening, members. Eleanor Hoyle, Director of Planning, Housing and Regulatory Services.
Thank you. And Victoria?
Victoria Freeman, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you. We've had apologies from Councillor Bridge and Councillor Palmer. We've had discussed the substitutes. And in accordance with Procedure Rules 17.5 and 17.9, these councillors have the same rights as the ordinary member of the committee for whom they are substituting. Thank you for coming. Are there any declarations of interest, please? I see none. If that could be noted, thank you. So moving on to the main business of the evening, as I say, it's an extraordinary meeting where we are reviewing the a submission from officers regarding in response to the proposed draft MPPF, which 2025 draft MPPF. We do have a lot of business to do this evening, so I will try to keep up suitable haste, but give everyone the opportunity to ask whatever questions they would like. But I would like to, before we start, to give credit to the officers. It's a substantial piece of work, presented at an inconvenient point in time, because I'm sure they need to be doing other work regarding regulation, A-team response, etc. So I think we're all aware of that. So, Councillor Taylor.
I'd just like to add to that my thanks to the officers. I think it's a robust.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I'd like to point out that the recommendations which follow on from this evening's business are on pages 13 to 84. Sorry, are on page 14, I beg your pardon. That would be a long recommendation. They do come in three parts. I won't spend any time at the moment, but our objective this evening is to note and comment on the offering by the officers, and the output of this evening would then be moved on to Cabinet on the 10th of February. And as you'll appreciate, we have fairly little time. We have to get a response back, I believe, to government by the 10th of March. And there is a final part to the recommendation, which is about delegated authority to the Director of Planning, Housing and Regulatory Services, which is a fairly standard addition, but we'll come to that as and when. What I'd like to do is to hand over James for the introductory part to set the scene for this evening as to the context of the and the impact of the perceived changes to the MPPF, and then that will set us rolling before we get into the detail of the questions and the responses to them. James, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of things to update on the report, just for clarity. Chapter 11 unfortunately was omitted from our response. So Chapter 11 should cover questions 100 to 113. And I don't know what on the papers, but it's page 49 of Annex 1 for reference. There's also 2 references in Chapter 12 in the report. Again, for clarity, Chapter 12 covers making effective use of land, and that covers questions 114 to 129. There's just 2 references to Chapter 12. There's also some further in the actual consultation document. I think we made it for ease of clarity. We reduced the subheadings and put some in terms of coverings, but just for further clarity, there's a further questions section which covers questions 192 to 193. There's a written ministerial statement and other documents, which is question 194. And we put under, as I said, under Annex B, the consultation, all the questions, but also within that Annex B is Annex C, reforming site thresholds, questions 213 to 216. Implementation of a new medium category in the regulations, questions 217 to 221. And uplifting the planning permission and principal threshold, questions 222 and 223. However, all the questions are answered in the order that they are. It's just in terms of the consultation, I think we put it for ease of member reference. So in terms of the consultation is seeking views on a revised version of the National Planning Policy Framework and a set of related planning system reforms. It also seeks views on data centres and on-site energy generation, standardised inputs in viability assessments and reforming site thresholds. Comprises 225 questions, and the consultation runs from the 16th of December 25 to the 10th of March, as the Chairman has said, 2026. The revisions proposed as part of the consultation seek to progress significant structural improvements to the framework, introducing a clear set of separate policies for both plan making and decision making. The aim of this is to achieve 3 key objectives: to ensure that national policy is accessible and understandable for everyone who uses it, establishes a comprehensive suite of national policies on general planning matters which will apply across the country, and make the policy which it contains more rule-based and certain. So the document is split into chapters that generally align to the chapters provided in the draft MPPF, and that's also accompanying the consultation and setting out the scope of each chapter and the changes proposed. So in terms of implementation and for the transitional phase, the consultation confirms that for decision making, it is proposed for the MPPF to be a material consideration from the day it is published, and we don't have obviously that date confirmed at this time. For plan making, the new MPPF will apply to new style local plans that will be produced through the new system under the Planning and Infrastructure Act that is being progressed currently. So essentially what that means is the new PPF, when published, will not apply to the current local plan that we're currently progressing. The consultation notes that inconsistencies with development plans will fall away over time as new development plans are adopted that do not duplicate, replicate, or modify MPPF policies. For decision making, the consultation confirms due weight should be given to development plan policies in relation to their consistency with the framework. Where these are inconsistent, little weight should be afforded, except where a plan has been examined against the new framework. So turning to the actual consultation itself. So in the consultation introduction, the case for non-statutory national policy is made, which considers that the core aim of statutory national development management policies can be secured within the current legal framework by setting out much clearer policies for planning and decision making as proposed in the consultation, making explicit that decision-making policies should not be repeated in development plans. And lastly, providing for the policies to bear on the system from day one by requiring that any inconsistent local policies are immediately given very limited weight. So this is addressed in the consultation in principally question 1, which will come to the chairman will go through that in due course, with the changes to the structure and content of the MPPF to improve its clarity, usability and consistency considered in questions 2, 3 and 4. And again, the chairman will go through that in greater detail. Then turning to the sort of the MPPF, because obviously those questions 1 to 4 relate to the changes proposed, and then effectively questions 5 onwards to 225 deal with the changes to those actual individual policies. So the consultation also proposes a number of substantive reforms to unlock more homes in the right place and further support the commercial development needed to drive growth. So to encapsulate this, there are 12 significant reforms that are proposed in the consultation. I haven't gone into a lot of detail on these because I know that it's important that members get to the questions quickly. So the 12 key reforms are a sort of a permanent presumption in favour of suitably located development. It's building homes around stations, and the consultation seeks to establish in principle support, which is the default yes for suitable proposals that develop land around railway stations within existing settlements and around well-connected train stations outside settlements, including on greenbelt land. So knowing the fact that that's coming forward, we need to look at our current local plan and see how we can future-proof that, knowing the fact that whilst our local plan won't be examined under the proposed MPPF, it's under the existing, we know that that's coming forward. So it's important that we account for that moving forward. Thirdly, driving urban and suburban densification. Consultation seeks to get the most use out of land in urban and suburban areas, including through the redevelopment of corner and other low density plots, upward extensions and infill development, including within residential curtilages. Number 4, securing a diverse mix of homes. The consultation supports the need of different groups through the planning system, includes stronger support for rural, social and affordable housing, and setting clearer expectations for accessible housing to meet the needs of older and disabled people. Number 5, supporting small and medium sites. The consultation seeks to make it easier to bring forward small sites through clear support for the principle of development in different locations. The policies on building more densely in settlements and strengthen support for mixed tenure developments. Number 6, streamlining local standards. It seeks to promote certainty for applicants and speed up local plan production by limiting quantitative standards in development plans to only those specific issues where local verification is justified. And number 7, boosting local and regional economies. Seeks to encourage economic growth by giving substantial weight to the benefits of supporting business growth and to particular areas and sectors, including those named in the industrial strategy, AI growth zones, logistics, town centres and agricultural and rural development. Number 8, supporting critical and growth materials. This seeks to ensure that adequate provision is made for their extraction, recognising their economic importance. Obviously, in the consultation, we've only answered the minerals questions lightly because we're not the Minerals Authority. When we get to those in the questions, the Chairman will raise in due course. Number 9, embedding a vision-led approach to transport. And this is quite important and very relevant in terms of current planning. It seeks to further embed the changes made in the December 2024 MPPF, which signalled the importance of moving away from a predict and provide approach to transport planning that can create unattractive environments dominated by cars towards a more vision-led approach. Number 10, better addressing climate change. The consultation seeks to set out how decisions can take a proactive approach to both mitigation and adaptation in relation to climate change. And then penultimately, conserving and enhancing the natural environment. And consultation seeks to make a number of changes, including to reflect local nature recoverance strategies, to recognise landscape character and conserve and enhance existing natural features, to incorporate swift bricks and to provide guidance on sites of local importance for nature. And lastly, to take a more positive approach to the use of heritage assets. So the consultation seeks a clearer and more positive approach which can better support suitable heritage related development, replacing the current policies that are difficult to navigate. So I know the chairman is then going to go through the questions by chapter. And obviously I'll leave that for the chairman to do, because obviously it clarifies which questions relate to which chapter. I'd also like to refer members to the risk assessment in Annex 2 of your papers, which sets out the risks. You'll notice there are a number of high-level risks in terms of red risks on the risk register. This is, there I can call it a bang up-to-date risk register because it reflects the speed that we're having to move the local plan through the process, and also to make sure that also we, to a degree, retrofit what is likely to come forward in this MPPF to make sure our current local plan captures these elements. Because, as I said in this report, for decision making, not for plan making, the MPPF becomes binding on decisions when it's adopted, but it's not for plan making. And I think that is a very clear indication. So we'll go into that into a bit more detail. Just for clarity, that this MPPF we're consulting does not apply to the current local plan, but the importance of that is once this new MPPF is adopted, it will be applicable to decision making. So DM applications, when you're sitting on area planning committee, it will be a relevant consideration then. And if there's any conflict with the local plan, then the local plan carries very limited weight, and that's quite important. And as I said, that's why, you know, the transition arrangements are in force. Over time, that conflict between the local plan and the MPPF will be diminished, because obviously you'll adopt a new local plan which will be compliant with the MPPF. That's just quite an important consideration for us going forward in the current local plan. We need to make sure as much as we possibly can, although I will add timing isn't great for us because we're coming to effectively full council in September in terms of the Regulation 19. So that means when the government decide to publish this MPPF, we've got to sort of think ahead to make sure we can make our Reg 19 plan as close as possible that it can align with this MPPF. But hopefully we'll go through that and examine that in further detail. And if members have got any questions on that, we'll go through that. But I think I'll hand to the chairman, who's got the envious task of taking us through 225 questions, getting your feedback on those. So thank you very much.
Thank you, James. I'm glad you made that last point, because it's something I want us all to swallow whole, is that the implications of this draft MPPF will have impacts on any decisions making as soon as it's ratified, whether we have a local plan or whether we don't. So I just wanted people to be aware of that. Before we get into the questions per se, I'm going to pass this over to Kelly or James at the end. There's a couple of typos I wanted to point out. On 4.8, the second line, I think, should read link, not line. But I'll don't worry about that now. I'll hand this over to you. And I just want to make a point with regard to 414 bullet point 3. There is reference to the removal of footnote 7, which is currently the protection within the current MPPF or Greenbelt from developments, even where there is a shortfall in 5-year land supply. As we go through, we'll pick up where it is my understanding that is picked up in other parts of the policy. So I just wanted to point that out. This is going to be fairly mechanistic, for which I apologise, but I think it's the only way to do it. And I'm just going to go through each chapter and go through quickly through each of the questions. And if someone wants me to stop at a particular question, they stick their hand up. And with Victoria's assistance, I'll pick up any hands that go up online. So I'm going to move into Annex 1. I think James has already covered in general terms the consultation introductions, which is encompassed by questions 1 to 5. So I'm looking eagerly for hands, but not wanting you to do it unless you want to. So question 1, question 2, question 3, question 4, question 5. Right, moving swiftly on. Chapter 2 covers plan making policies, and that covers questions 6 to 20. Okay. I've got something. Yes, Councillor Hood.
I had something on question 16. Okay, well that's
I've got something on 9. So
oh right,
9 beats 16, but
wonderful.
anyone else may beat that. But okay, so we're coming on to chapter 2, question 6. So 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Actually, I missed 9, didn't I? I missed 9. Thank you. Yeah, my point on 9 is it relates to the aspiration that local plans will be produced in 30 months. I'd just like to make the point that, yes, that seems a reasonable aspiration, although it's not achieved by many councils throughout the country, but it should be doable. But I just want to make sure that it is noted that it's not at the sacrifice of accumulating the profit evidence base that we will require to submit a valid local plan. So it's not a race in the sense, although it's an aspiration that we should meet this 30-month target.
No. I think we're very clear that we think it's an unrealistic target timeframe, and we've sort of set that out, given the complexities around plan. I think that's, if the government can show us some examples of how that can be achieved when local plans are longer than that, that would be very interesting forward. But I agree with what.
At 10.
I mean, I can't think of any local plan making authority that's produced a local plan anywhere in that sort of timescale, and therefore, in my view, it's totally unrealistic and stupid to dream up targets you can't meet. You would think that the government would have learnt that setting targets you can't meet is a bad idea. And either it's going to be a poorly produced local plan in that case, but I'd have thought they should continue to be reviewed every 5 years. That's always been the aim, and most of them haven't achieved that.
I think that's a point well made. I think if it is intended to be a measure of failure, we should be looking at the quality of the output rather than the speed at which it gets through the past the finishing post. And I think the officers have made that point. I just wanted to underpin it. Thank you. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Well, I've got a 14. It's a question really, and it's, does PM9 make any reference to land allocation or compulsory purchase as a legitimate option in plan making? Because I couldn't see it, and I think those are normal mechanisms which are in use on a regular basis. I've got no problem if you take it away.
Did you want to respond to that?
Not necessarily. It's just I want to point out that I couldn't see it, and it isn't mentioned in the response.
Okay, we'll take that away.
You note it. Thank you. 15. Councillor Hood.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. I'd like some kind of elaboration on this answer in terms of why are we kind of advocating that there's flexibility here? Because I think most of us have had enough of developers being given enough room to renegotiate or negotiate rather their way out of infrastructure obligations. My fear is that when you've got multiple sites and multiple developers with the interests, it's going to allow responsibility to be kind of dodged. And I just don't really follow the argument about giving the developers that additional flexibility.
I'm just looking at seeing where you feel developers have been given additional flexibility. Obviously, this seeks to duty to cooperate is signal to going. We're currently dealing with duty to cooperate under the current local plan system. New system seeks to delete the duty to cooperate but maintain.
I'm sorry, I think I'm on 16.
I thought you said 15.
No, definitely no.
Oh, I completely missed it. Sorry, I've completely lost track on that. So, okay.
It's like a Two Ronnies sketch where everything's like.
Let me just go through that then.
So this is about policy PM12. So there, I guess this is all about, isn't it, providing the certainty to developers at a stage so that, for example, what we're actually asking sales. So I guess for this one, loading, viability, we do to an extent already, but obviously then there's lots of negotiation. So we have more certainty, set out what we're asking. They can take.
So by having that flexibility, you think that the planning authority has more control?
Because you'll set your right. Yeah, you'll be setting out those requirements up front. So, you know, whether it's, you know, whatever infrastructure is going to be required, that's going to be required as part of that policy to deliver. We do, you know, as we move forward with our local plan now, we will be setting out those kind of site-specific high-level infrastructure requirements. But then in the current plan system and set up this, you know, front-loading the work, I think, would be a positive.
Now brought up. I mean, I think it is added clarity because the one thing we always get in terms of, and this isn't about viability, is around, do developers pay too much for the values up front? So they should know at an early stage what the costs are, because then that enables, once you know what the costs are, that should be driven down in terms of the land price, because it's the landowner that bear the brunt in terms of the costs, and that's how viability works. So all contributions are borne by the landowner. They're not really, they're passed to the landowner in the price they pay for the land. So the more they know up front, the more they can get clarity from us as the local planning authority, that effectively the more competitive the land value is. Therefore, you shouldn't be then coming up with these unexpected excessive costs in terms of developing the land, because they should be negotiated with the landowner. So to agree, 100% agree, which is why we put strongly agree on that basis. Yeah, we did agree, so partially agree. You know, we should be having more clarity on terms of cost.
Pretty useful. That's pretty helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving swiftly on, 17. Okay, I've got an 18. I've got 18. If you look at it, I think, according to your comments, I think you've actually should read disagree. Although you got partially agree, it just seems that your comments seem to suggest that you disagree. So I think I read that slightly differently. And I think what you were saying is, aren't you saying that over-prescription of standards can be counterproductive? So it seems to me that you're effectively agreeing, but being rather nice about it, disagreeing rather, being not rather nice about it. Okay. Moving on, 19, 20. Right, that's the end of chapter 2. We're moving on to chapter 3, which is decision-making policies, and that's question 21 to 32. So 21, feel like a bingo caller. And I haven't got the key at the door, but so 22, 23, 24, 25. That 25, Councillor Hood?
24.
Okay.
I was going to call house. With 24, with this policy, I suppose this applies when this is likely to be less of a problem, isn't it, going forward? If we're in the realms of much bigger unitary authorities, because you're going to have much bigger planning teams. So which are going to enable a greater degree of specialisation amongst the officers.
I think, yeah. I think in terms of principle, where this one comes around this is around, or this is quicker decision making. And that's what the government want us to do. Whereas I think they've heard from the development that some decisions aren't issued principally on the basis that you're waiting for stat consultees. Now, I will accept there is a sort of a hesitance, because obviously cover all matters. They're not purveyors of all information. Get statutory consultee comments to come in, and sometimes there is a sort of a wait while we chase statutory consultees to make sure that when we're producing reports, we're not going to do something that hasn't had statutory consultees have their full comments. So this is the government seeking to say, should we effectively waiver that decision without those statutory consultees to get decisions moving quicker? And I think that's why we put the answer that we have, basis that whilst we want to have sorry, but hopefully did everyone hear that? Thank you.
Councillor Thornwell.
Also a problem though, isn't there, in issuing decision notices? We have a problem anyway, because like Clare Lane in East Malling, it took 12 months to issue the decision notice because we were still dealing with the legal agreement.
Legal agreements are always going to take a bit longer to progress, because what members agree or what officers of delegation agree are heads of terms, but they won't actually agree the detailed negotiations. They'll agree a high level head in terms of costs, and then it's discussions on the details. So I agree 12 months is far too long, but I'd say a 3 to 4 month in terms of section 106, a more complex one could be the more standard detail. And we do have regular conversations with our legal team who are external on moving those forward, so we know where they are. But I do agree there is an expectation as a resolution to approve that should be progressed quickly.
Using that as an example.
25, 26. Well, I've got a 27. This relates to section 106 and section 106A variations. And I didn't quite understand the response, James, where it actually says that if there is a significant variation, that you are suggesting there should be another planning application rather than an S106A. My question is, isn't the S106 a contract and the S106A the vehicle for varying the contract? What would another planning application aim to achieve?
It is, you're correct, but section 106A, in terms of how the section 106 is built, you can't vary without agreement section 106 for the first 5 years of a consent being granted. Section 106A is the formal mechanism that allows you to vary the 106 after the 5-year time period. So if it's within a 5-year time period, due to various factors, we get those due to various factors like the economic situation, viability on the ground has changed, then, you know, do we want to move development forward? Yes, we do, because we've got a 5-year housing land supply to meet. But do we have to be, wary that conditions change? So section 106 is the process, and effectively the way the legislation is drafted, you can't vary it within 5 years, unless, there's formal agreement from the LPA. So if we decide, no, we're not going to vary it, there's no formal mechanism to vary it. And effectively, whereas 106A is the formal mechanism where you can submit an application, you don't need any agreement, just vary the 106 and submit a form to the local authority after the 5 years, and you've got an automatic right, and would have to consider that on that basis. So that's the kind of difference between the mechanisms.
So could we just add inside 5 years?
We could do.
Yeah, I mean, just immortal.
But obviously there's the written ministerial statement that just got released last week about a greater flexibility in terms of delivering, and there's also stuff that's coming forward in terms of sites that are stalled under section 106 agreement that are being built unoccupied, and the government released quite substantial sums of money and they're releasing a new form soon that effectively in exceptional circumstances allows a local planning authority to vary the section 106 agreements, because what they want to see is if sites are stalled, housing associations aren't buying them, they want to see delivery, they want to see houses coming forward, they want to see affordable housings, local planning authorities to be sort of aligned to the fact that there are issues with the system, so they're seeking to unlock different ways of doing.
Councillor Thornhill.
Sorry, I'm going back to section 106 again then. So to use another example, Bellingham Way, Panetone and the bus service. We haven't got a bus because enough money was not collected to fund the costs of the bus. And therefore, we're still waiting for a revised section 106 agreement to reflect the money that the bus operators that can be put into place for the cost that's actually being connected. So how does this address that issue? It's not to do with housing, the industrial side.
Site you're referring to, and again, that is in train, and that's on the basis that you're right, KCC didn't effectively cater for the 5-year bus provision. That's what we normally provide, and it can only fund a much shorter bus provision. Have to get developers' agreement to transfer some of the funds within the agreement. So that's a slightly separate matter, as I said, not relating to delivery. That's relating to funds that have been secured specifically for a specific purpose in a legal agreement, which they can't be used for any other purpose. So a slightly different element to what this question is asking, that is funds that were secured under 106 for a certain contribution, which now want to be spent on something else, and you have to get a developer to.
So just to come back, this document doesn't address that issue anywhere.
That won't address it.
Quick point of clarification. If a developer within the 5 years Well, they possibly before they even really started, says the amount of affordable housing that I've got here isn't viable anymore, and they want a significant variation in that basis. It comes forward as a planning application.
There is such thing as a Section 73 agreement, which is a variation of a condition. So, in essence, if they're looking to change the mix that's secured, then you'd need to come through an application, which would also need a modification of the Section 106 agreement, because obviously numbers may change, housing numbers may change over that period of time. But as I said, if it's within the 5 years, we would only normally accept that if we're very wary that there are issues in the market that are meaning developers can't provide affordable housing, i.e. RPs aren't providing smaller sites. And that's a situation that we're currently facing, where there are issues in the RP sector in terms of financing and what they're having to do their own housing stock.
Thank you. 28. Councillor Hood.
Yes, going back, I'm still unclear about this deviation. I'm intrigued by this.
On 27, yes?
I'm on 28 because you just said 28. The second section, which says, due to the Finney decision, local authorities now are not specific in terms of the amount and tenure of affordable housing in descriptions, and therefore the use of this S73 does not impact. Can you tell us a little bit more, expand a little bit more about S73, and can you just confirm whether an applicant, having got planning consent and they want to change the level of affordable housing, whether that has to come back as a planning application? Because I'm just a little unclear.
In terms of what it is, Section 73. Section 73 is an application used to vary the conditions normally attached on the original planning permission. So it's a standalone permission. If you've got conditions that you don't think you comply with, or you wish to seek vary, it is a planning application in its own right. It sits alongside the original permission. So if it was to be granted, you'd get two implementable permissions either side. It duplicates the conditions on the substantive consent and minus the condition they're seeking to remove, and it might seek to vary it. Now, within Section 106s, you normally have within the agreement, you normally have a clause which allows, if there's a Section 73 application, Section 106 will still apply. If that clause is not in there, then you'd need to do a deed of variation on Section 106. And as I've previously said, if you have a planning consent that's granted with a Section 106 and it's a new planning consent within the 5 years, you can only seek to modify that with agreement with the local planning authority. There is no formal mechanism to vary that Section 106 unless there's a formal agreement. Section 106A, I said, is the formal mechanism to vary older Section 1 agreements that are outside the 5-year period. That is the formal mechanism where there's no agreement required. So it's down to the local planning authority whether they accept that agreement. And as I previously said, a lot of the time we are fully aware that there are issues in the market and making it difficult for sites to come forward, either through RPs, ground conditions, market conditions, problems in terms of securing lending, all those sorts of things can have issues and impacts on affordable housing, which we need to be wary of in terms of because they can stall developments coming forward, because there may be particular triggers in a development which say affordable housing needs to come forward at X stage, and there's market conditions that are prohibiting that, so the development stalls. So we need to unlock that. Doesn't mean that we capitulate to what the developer agrees, because we'll normally get a viability consultant on it. and they will say, we need to verify what you're telling us, but we need to be very wary of that to making sure we can unlock issues in the future going forward. Make sure our sites come forward on our affordable housing.
And they can be called in sections 74, 73s rather can be they can be called in by members in the normal way.
They are a
Yeah.
planning application that will sit alongside, and I know section 73s have been called into the APC.
28. 29.
I wanted to know more about the Finney decision. The implication of that. It mentions the Finney decision. What does that?
We're back on 28.
Yeah.
I mean, I know the Finney decision, but I wasn't going to go into huge details. It's case law agreed by the Court of Appeal, which effectively sets policy going forward, which the government have to account for in any policy changes they make. That's what they're seeking to do under this proposal. But it's quite a complex case law. But, you know, as it says, when the Court of Appeal make decisions which change the law, because they are lawmakers, then the government have to reflect that in the MPPF and make sure they accommodate that, like they did for the definition of gypsies and travellers. They had to change the gypsy definition, and effectively that took a long time for it to feed into policy, but eventually it has done. And effectively that was as a result of a Court of Appeal decision that effectively changed the definition, the government's definition, gypsy and travellers. That's just an example of how that works.
Thank you. 29. 30. I've got a question on 31. There's a reference to the local enforcement plan. I just want to double check we have one.
Certainly do, and it will be coming to this committee in March. Updated version of the local enforcement plan for members' consideration going forward.
Just want to stress that wasn't rehearsed.
Chairman, that's what guides the principles of how we enforce. Obviously, we publish, as our cabinet member is fully aware, that's what guides how we make decisions on enforcement in terms of priorities and whether it's something that we progress in terms of enforcement notices.
Okay, moving on to chapter 4, which is achieving sustainable development, which covers question.
Well, you've jumped ahead. 32.
Oh, I beg your pardon, I missed 32. Any hands on that one?
Yeah, there's
Councillor Hood.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I absolutely agree with the comment to the second part, to part A, punitive planning application fees for retrospective development applications rather than the intent counting against the developer. I think it's in, we know that some people do make mistakes, but we've seen a number of applications, or rather retrospective planning applications, where planning consent has been given and the thing that's been created, that's been built, there's no relation to what's been given. So if we are able to apply additional fees to them to try and prevent this from happening in future, that would be fantastic.
Councillor Hornwell.
Where we use the phrase, say, heritage in the last line, does that include conservation areas? Yes.
Was question 32? And the answer is yes.
Yes.
Landscapes and heritage includes conservation areas.
Okay, moving on, chapter 4, achieving sustainable development. questions 34 to 41. I've got one on 34, and it's a question, James and Kelly. Doesn't policy S1 retain the protection of the greenbelt in footnote 23, which replaces footnote 7 as far as plan making is concerned? The reason I asked, because there was concern about the removal of footnote 7, and I wanted to make sure that it was covered in other parts of the policy, so it's not as dramatic as we anticipated. So, thank you. 35? Okay, I've got a 35. Isn't it possible to broadly define, no, sorry, isn't it impossible to broadly define the term hamlet in real terms? I just think it's a ridiculous idea, because hamlet is dependent upon local geography and the demographics. A hamlet in Tower Hamlets is going to be different from a hamlet in Herefordshire, where virtually the whole county is made up of hamlets. So that's just my view. I wondered if members agree. Thank you. Councillor Hood.
Yeah, I kind of take a different view of this, because you have some settlements where what you think is a village actually isn't a village. I'm thinking of East Peckham specifically. East Peckham is a collection of hamlets. It's not a village. And as you go through it, you see the distinct parts of it identified. And I think I think it's important that where you have got those communities that they're respected. Otherwise, you get the infilling it, and that the historical nature of that place is completely lost, because people who live in Little Mill will be very different to people, will have a very different identity to people who live in Hale Street. It's kind of, I think it is important. I think this is important. I think the difference between a hamlet, a village, and a town are, the identity is important to communities, and I think I'm glad it's in there.
Okay, I think my point is a hamlet can be 3 houses, could be 30 houses, could be 40 houses, but it's difficult to define. If we're going up a stage, I've been to meetings at Hildenborough where they define themselves as a completely isolated community, where in many ways they are an attachment to Tunbridge, whether they like it or not. So, yeah, what I'm saying is these things are difficult to define, particularly at the lower level. But I don't know if you guys have got any view on that. I don't want to drag it out. That's just a point. $35. Well, I've got a 35. No, sorry, that was 35. And I mean, my summary to that was, shouldn't it be left for the council to decide what they think is a hamlet rather than the government to decide? But 36.
Could I just make a comment?
Okay.
The whole thing in here, I think there's going to be lots of room for lawyers here. As someone who worked in the solicitor's office, it's really good. We go to court and find out what the definition of a hamlet is.
$36. 37. 38. Just for clear, which question are we? 38. Okay, good.
We can change that to disagree. Points, paragraph.
My point about 38 is, and it's a question, doesn't policy S5 set out to apply Greenbelt policy to non-Greenbelt land where it hasn't got this protection already? But I mean, I'm not complaining about it, but it seems a bit bizarre. But point. Okay. Question 39. Anyone? Right. On 39, doesn't paragraph 1J make it clear that the reference is to single authorities? I mean, when I read it, I know you were making the point that it was slightly confusing. I suggest that you have a look at 1J. You may disagree with me, but that was my reading of it. It seemed fairly clear that it was one authority. Yeah, thank you. 40. 41. 42. Right, 42 takes us into chapter 5, which is meeting the challenge of climate change. Is that on 42, Councillor Hood?
Unsurprisingly, yes. Yeah, I'm broadly, I agree with the responses regarding climate change. On 42, I just want some clarification about the different time periods referenced for the anticipated lifetimes of the different properties. So there's a difference between, we've got 100 years for residential, 75 years for non-residential, and then you've got even longer for the urban extensions. So why are urban extensions different to residential? If they're simply extensions of existing settlements, I'd just like a bit of clarification about that.
In terms of what it seeks to, if it's 100 years for residential, 75 for non-residential, is that the one you're referring to? Yeah, because in terms of non-residential uses, normally have a greater chance of changing to their, I think it's due to their, in terms of their value, they have a, highest residential is highest land value. Therefore, on that basis, there's general assumption that land value, that residential values will stay around longer than commercial value. And I think on that basis, that's why there is a different period of time. And I think that's my assumption.
I think it's also to do with flood. Well, in terms of the lifetime of homes, when you look at flood risk modelling, they look at 100 years, and so kind of like an emphasis that a property should the lifespan of a property, a residential property, is. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So it's based on kind of flood risk modelling, and they say that a lifetime of a home should be 100 years, and so that's kind of how it's set out. But obviously, homes do last a lot longer than 100 years, and so it's to do with risk.
43, 44, 45, 46. Councillor Hood.
Yeah, 44. When we're talking about, I think I might have come in too early. This is about flooding rather than water sufficiency, isn't it? Water. We talk about water sufficiency later on in the. Yeah, thank you.
Drainage and tree planting, etc. 45, 46, 47. Tick, tick. That's the end of chapter 5. Chapter 6 is delivering a sufficient supply of homes, and it covers quite a wide section, 48 to 83. Just to warn you, I don't have anything until 80, so I'm going to rattle on until you stop me. I've got 48, 49, 50, 60, sorry, 49, 50, 51, 52, I'm getting keen, aren't I? 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65. Which one?
5.
Go for
I
it.
just wanted to very quick, about 10% of the total development proposal for the minimum proportion of social rent. Is that rather low? I would. Couldn't we have gone for a higher number? Shouldn't we have asked for a higher proportion than that?
You remember when First Homes came out, looking at 10% of the total quantum of development on the site. So we would still seek our local level in terms of TNBC. We've got 40%, but it's about 10% of the total quantum of development coming forward. So that can be quite so. So in terms of where we're at, it kind of reflects where government was previously with First Homes provision, where we're moving forward. Kelly might add to that.
So this is a minimum. So asking for. But obviously we'll have a policy ourselves in terms of social rent,
Default.
the kind of a default position.
It just seems odd that it's great that we've got a much higher proportion, but it seems odd that we're commenting on the MPPF and not having a more aspirational figure for the national picture.
That, you know, there's differences regionally in terms of what types of homes are required. So 10% as a default would see 10% of social forward, but obviously in other locations where there's more requirement.
Add to that, remember when you're looking at affordable housing in terms of using the MPPF glossary definition, there's a wide range of products that are defined as affordable, as constitute affordable housing. So it's mainly based on your evidence base that looks at where Kelly said, which looks at your evidence base for social rent. Ours is particularly high, as you'll be aware, in terms of our emerging local plan, in terms of 50% provision on social rent, 40% intermediate. So, you know, ours is a particularly high level and aspiration, but that's an evidence base. That won't cover every area and every opportunity. And if you set the minimum too high on social rent, remember this is applying to all sites, anything over major developments, anything over 10 or 5 if you're in a protected area. So that's why I think you set the level at a threshold that the government previously set at First Homes, because that was a recognised standard.
66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80. Regarding 80, my question is, would HO3, policy HO3 help to deter land banking, because it isn't specifically mentioned?
Potentially. I mean, the ability to bring development forward is currently still available with local planning authorities, because whilst you've got a default period of 3 years or 5 years, depending if it's an outline, you can bring development forward earlier than the 3-year default period or 5-year default period, with agreement with the developer and subject to the viability. So that ability already exists now, and I think the government is looking to strengthen that. Will it deal with land banking? I suppose I have to answer that question quite carefully, because is there a land banking situation now when we have the ability across the country? There's lots of authorities in haven't got 5-year supplies. Is that currently being addressed now? So I don't know how this will address issues of land banking personally. But the government have got proposals in terms of dealing with sites. They're bringing in as part of the localism act the ability to not accept an application where there's a proven record of under delivery or housing developers, which previous governments have tried to bring in. How you actually prove that there's a record of under delivery is quite difficult, because housing developer will come forward and say it's market conditions. So reasons why other governments haven't brought that forward is for that particular reason, that it's particularly difficult to substantiate under delivery, and you'll probably get a challenge on it. So land banking is a particularly difficult issue which the government are seeking to try to tackle, but it's a very proven.
Thank you, James. You answered the question, although it didn't really solve the problem, does it?
I know.
But, thank you so much. Right, 81, 82, 83. I've got one on 83. The question I've written is, shouldn't this read allocated rather than adopting housing requirements? Because it makes it sound as though we've all signed up to the housing number, but it's an allocated number, as we all know. So I think it's just a fine point of wording. Thank you. Right, that's 83. So we're now on to chapter 7, which is building a strong and efficient economy. Questions 84 to 87, 84, 85, 86, 87. Just a suggestion actually on 87. At the tail end, my suggestion would be that we added, wherever possible, opportunities should be taken to relocate inappropriate business activity away from town centre locations. I think we should have a general strategy, is that we're trying to develop town centres so that the right people and the right types of business or housing is provided in the town centres, and I think it should be an aspiration. For example, there are lots of business, as far as I personally am concerned, that operate in Tunbridge town centre that could be just as easily doing their business elsewhere. And in the long term, I think we should be aspiring to change that. But an opinion. But I've noted it, and it's you guys. That's whether you add it or not. I don't know if anyone has any contrary opinions. Thank you.
And it's what we used to call non-conforming development.
What I would call visionary. But okay, 88. Councillor.
I think I'm not. I think I should be on 90. But it's in relation to what you were saying. It's what can we do? What form of wording can we respond to these questions to make the point that where we have ground floor units in the high street, that we can resist the conversion of the ground floor units into residential, because we've got particular problems. We've had particular problems at Area 1 with a really prominent building in the heart of the town that we can see has got potential, but we've had applications come in to convert that into flats, first floor flats, which seems, is there any representation that we can make in this section to address that where we can see that there's a specific benefit for the town for a retail or hospitality use.
More, we're on chapter 8. isn't it? Because you're looking at more questions 88 onwards, in terms of which is during the vitality of town centres. So that's where you're looking at. I mean, certainly, I mean that is a key thrust where you've got an active frontage and you've got a primary shopping centre. You know, when you've got sort of an active shop unit in terms of the use. I almost went back to the old use class then. The use then that's something that we look to strive for because it's an active frontage. It's pedestrian footfall. It's attracting it, whereas residential is a dead frontage. So where we've got primary shopping areas and we're identifying those in the plans, that's what we should be, policy should be seeking to encompass that. So we can just make sure that within those sections we capture that. I think it does.
88. 89. 90. 91. 92. Right, that's chapter 8. We're now on to chapter 9, which is supporting high quality communications. And so we're on 93, 94, 95. I don't think anyone can argue with that. Chapter 10 is securing clean energy and water, and that covers questions 96 to 99. And so 96.
Yeah,
Councillor Hood.
yeah. This comes to my what I was alluding to earlier, where where we know that we've got real problems with living in a water stressed corner of Kent, but currently we don't seem to have any powers to compel water companies. Water companies aren't statutory consultees, so I'm just looking for the officers for some kind of reassurance that where we have planning applications coming forward, that we can actually. I know we've got these things called wilderness conditions where you can put a hold on development until they can demonstrate how the wastewater is going to be treated. But there isn't a similar thing for the supply of water. So how is there any way that we can strengthen the wording to address this? Because I think this is something that's going to be more and more important going forward.
I totally agree. I mean, I've tried to cover it under 99A, and I've got a suggested insert for that, but we'll come to that. But we're on 96 at the moment, so I think you put your hand up, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. I'm not a member of your committee. I've got to agree with what Mark says, but I think we need to extend that to power supply and sewage. And it's not just on site, it's the capability off site as well.
Councillor Banks.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I just really wanted to clarify statutory consultations, because I know it crops up in the risk assessment, failure to meet the statutory requirements. I think infrastructure, plowing ahead quickly, building houses at a very fast rate, okay, has to go with basically but very big improvements in infrastructure. And it seems to me that South East Water, a situation from the point of view of not being able to supply in certain circumstances, they were statutory consultees, unless I'm wrong, for all the development that's taken place, and they said yes to receiving more water rates, but I'm not sure whether they said yes to improving the infrastructure. As far as wastewater is concerned, again, the same situation applies. When you actually look at water testing in the Medway and in open bodies of water, the water quality has dropped. It's very bad. It's having a massive impact on the ecology and wildlife. Well, I'm trying to get my sort of finger on the fact of are we partly to blame in the past because our statutory consultation wasn't effective? How are we going to demonstrate in the future that our consultation with people who provide infrastructure is going to improved in line with the fact of the amount of houses we're going to deliver.
Both after that. I mean, obviously, we're currently at the moment reviewing stat consult fees. We've seen something from Southern Water regarding the Regulation 18 consultation. So, you know, they've all got their management plans and their 5-year management plans that they all work to. And, you know, how they factor into their infrastructure provision and their development proposal, they all sort of tie in. So, you know, the whole point of local plans is when we go out to consultation, they update effectively their management plans and their infrastructure plans, because they're looking at, well, this is the growth that's coming from West Kent area coming towards them. So they need to look at what they need to do to deliver. Because let's not forget, there's a statutory provision that anyone to connect under the Water Industries Act, that they can tap into a water supply. So Southern Water, all the water companies are under the provision that they have to supply potable water supply to new housing development. There is a statutory requirement to do that. So the whole point of local plans and IDP, infrastructure delivery plans, that we produce.
Apologies, your microphone's gone off.
They have to do a lot of work in terms of looking at how we're going to mitigate the impacts of development. And they need to tell us, that we tell them, this is what we're seeking to provide. This is our objectively assessed need. This is where we're looking to spatially distribute it around the borough. They need to work that into their infrastructure plans for delivery over our plan period, because we're telling them very clearly this is up to 2042 provision. They work on a 5-year plan. You know, these effectively houses are going to come forward in a period of time. They need to tell us what we need to provide for in our local plan. So again, that's what local planning does. That's what the consultation does. That's what the Regulation 18, the 19, review by examination in public does, to make sure we adequately meet the infrastructure, the needs arising from the local plan. What I can say is it's not there to address historic under provision or under infrastructure delivery in the past, which unfortunately is what we're facing now, where there's been a lack of investment from the infrastructure providers. But that's not a situation a local plan can deal with. That's an issue that the providers have to deal with. We can only mitigate the impacts arising from the local plan and from development proposals, not going back into the past about poor performance. They've given money to shareholders.
I'll come to you, Councillor Hood. I mean, I think from my perspective, it goes back to the point I was trying to make earlier about having a comprehensive and credible evidence base. And we haven't always been well served by our consultees, and that needs to change. And I think that debate is quite a hot one at the moment, but it applies to all of the services and all of the consultees. So I think good point, well made. Councillor Hood.
Yeah, I mean, this W4 relating to it, water infrastructure in the MPPF is completely inadequate. Section 2 just says applicants should not be required to demonstrate the need for water infrastructure developments. They're not in terms of normal planning applications. I'm happy to be corrected by officers. They're not statutory consultees, are they, water companies? I mean, when we had before, I hasten to add, before James joined the council, we had an application in my own ward, and the submission that we had from the water companies relating to that was completely bogus. I mean, when you look through the detail of it, you looked at the map coordinates, and they related to places in Surrey. The whole report had been cut and pasted from something else, and at the moment we've got an NPPF which seems to be in complete denial of the reality here. I mean, you're quite right about the water companies having a 5-year plan. The 5-year plan that South East Water is working on currently is based on housing figures from 2020. So it's they are completely behind the curve. Yeah. So we need to. I think we need to take this opportunity to flag up that the water companies need to be at the heart of planning, so that we can properly assess where their capacity is in terms of supply and in terms of treating waste.
Thank you. I don't want to get Anita excited here because we had Southern Water along to one of the overview and scrutiny meetings, and I must admit their explanation in terms of any form of resilience was pathetic. So you're absolutely right. We do need to get down the road on this one big time. Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Just on, it's a perennial problem, James. You mentioned the not going beyond the project. If one of the a sewage company or a water company says that you're going to put excessive strain on a facility 2 miles away, 5 miles away, a pipeline that they haven't got the capacity to take it. How does that figure with a new development? If that development is going to take it over or beyond the capacity of that?
Yeah, in terms of, as I said, what planning can't do, transgress into other legislation. We can't transgress into the Water Industry Act, i.e. the statutory right to connect to a potable supply. It's a relevant planning consideration in terms of capacity for that development. Normally, say for sewage, you might look at underground tanking or holding or reduced rates at night time when capacity increases because there's less demand. So it's right that, you know, in terms of a provision within a scheme, if there's known capacity issues on a system, you can look at how you would hold that development accountable for mitigating its own impact. And as I said, it normally can come up with holding tanks, discharge rates at reduced times. It can look at holding pipelines where you can actually hold an increased, go into too much detail, but there's lots of measures that you can put in place to mitigate those impacts on that development. But ultimately, what you can't do is if there's a constrained system that's already constrained serving the existing settlement, can't take into account that constrained provision. You have to take into account what's the development doing to mitigate that impact. And that can be due to various other factors that they're looking in. Can't consider that that's a constrained system because that's an existing situation that, you know, the developer has no control over. The sewage infrastructure provider or the potable water supply can only deal with that matter. So planning has its role, but I would say it's a limited role because then you've also got to look into account building regulations have a sort of control in terms of what they need to provide under the Building Act as well. So there is certainly a control that DM function has, but it's got to be related to existing development, which is why local plan can only mitigate its own impact. Can't mitigate anything else but its own impact on both sewage, potables, and all the other infrastructure that we've got.
Banks.
Just wanted to clarify a point, Chairman. That was, are the water companies a statutory consultancy or not? They are.
For local plan purposes, yes.
So although we don't have a complete power over these things, we have a responsibility. And so when something fails, then basically we have a small responsibility in that failure when infrastructure is not provided and is seen to fail. We don't have total responsibility, but we are a brick in the wall of that failure.
You remember this situation came at the last emergency meeting that occurred in terms of issues Southern Water, Southeastern Water principally had, where there was a failure in terms of supply, wasn't it? And that's due to a lack of infrastructure provision. So that's not down to us. We have to manage the situation as a local planning authority. So like did Tunbridge Wells, so did Maidstone. So you have to manage, but it's not our infrastructure. We cannot mitigate that. That's for them to make sure they've got adequate headroom, they've got reserves, they've got backup measures. We can't deal with that matter, but ultimately we get involved in a situation because it becomes an emergency situation for our residents. But local plan matter, that's something we do have control of, because we expect the statutory consultees to tell us what they need to provide. That's down to them. They need to tell us. We're telling them, this is the number, this is the plan period, this is where it's going. You now need to tell us what impact that has on your infrastructure and what you're going to need to do to mitigate that and to build it into your plan. So that's how the plan structure works forward, which is why they become a statutory consultee on local plans. So there is that engagement, like NHS, ICG, all the other stat consultees that we engage with through the local plan process. Why we formulate our IDP to sort of put that all into one document as a kind of usable, readable document that shows what we're providing for in the local plan as we move forward for infrastructure, purposely geared for infrastructure.
Councillor Tanner.
Thank you, Chair. If this consultation is designed to influence the new MPPF, can we highlight to the government the issues that we've experienced in our borough recently, especially as South East Water are reporting that they've been unable to meet requirements due to the level of development that they're having to meet the needs of? That they are about to report that, and surely we should be trying to influence the government in including them as statutory consultees. Is it possible for us to at least ask of the government to consider that? Thank you.
They are statutory consultee in local plans, so the water companies, infrastructure providers are statutory consultees, but also I'd answer your question directly. It's probably not appropriate to put those references in the consultation response, but there are separate means and measures that they're reporting back to government as a result of these emergency situations. Let's not forget I think it was the water minister that was particularly visiting Tunbridge Wells. So they're very aware of the kind of the lack of infrastructure that some of the infrastructure providers work with, and the lack of capacity and the lack of headroom they've got in the system. So there is a separate reporting mechanism that's going, there's a debrief of that emergency situation that occurred. The minister was heavily involved in that. That will be feeding back through the system. So I don't necessarily think this consultation, because they're asking specific questions, and if you don't answer the specific questions, I don't know how they get logged into the system. But I don't know if Kelly's got anything else to
Yeah, we'll just reading our answer, question 6. I think first paragraph under A, I think we're kind of saying that we support early engagement, the work collaboratively with the partners, provide a clear understanding. I think we could add in potentially at the beginning of that sentence, given current situation, given recent events in the area, we would support this. So I think we add that in. Sure.
Thank you. I would really appreciate that, because I think as the local authority, we should be stressing really strongly that our own borough, our own residents have faced real inconveniences with, surely we've all got a right to clean running water, and they've not had that. And I think James just referred to the local plan, but I think you said that is just development by development, which tends to sort of, you lose the message in the midst of the bigger picture. Thank you.
Point raised. Yeah, but that is an existing situation in terms of capacity. But as Kelly said, we can work something on the basis that makes sure we captures those elements, because they are saying that's likely to come forward in the future unless there's significant infrastructure improvement.
Councillor Hood.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's true that the powers that be are listening at all, because what you've got a situation in Sussex where they're heading in the other direction. So in Sussex, quite large areas of the county were covered by water neutrality rules about new development. And what they've actually done is the government said, we're going to get rid of them because it's growth, build. You don't have to worry about that. The very day after they'd done that, the water company announced that Ardingly and the other reservoir down there were almost out of water. So they aren't. The message isn't getting there. That is why we need to be stronger in our response here. In terms of this issue about statutory consultees, yes, they are statutory consultees. The water companies are for the local plan. They are not statutory consultees for individual planning applications, as I understand it. Because I sit on the Flood Risk and Water Management Committee at the County Council, and that is one of the things that they repeatedly say to us, both Southern Water and South East Water, that they want to be statutory consultees so they can highlight the inadequacy of their systems, and that they need to do better, and they won't be able to keep up with demand. Which brings me to the next point: is we're not expecting developers to pay for the inadequacies of the existing system. But what is reasonable is, in the same way that we expect developers to mitigate for the effect that their developments have on the local supply of housing, of places for school children, and library services, leisure services, all these kinds of things, and highways. If there is an additional capacity issue for wastewater and clean water, then that they should be meeting that. It should be clearly identified how much additional infrastructure is required, and a monetary sum should be allocated towards that. How can that seems entirely reasonable, and I think that should be form part of our response.
I mean, moving forward, let's say if there's an upgrade to wastewater treatment works as part of a local plan allocation or a settlement allocation, then obviously the statutory consultee on the local plan will submit comments on that basis, and in the IDP, we will secure that within the IDP delivery for an upgrade to the wastewater treatment works, and then we will then decide how that's put into specific policy. It may well be that that's required due to a specific allocation because it's that size. We will put that specific policy that they shall do an upgrade to the wastewater treatment works at X, and that means as part of that policy that would be secured. Or we may put it as a combination of sites that they will have to secure an upgrade. So it is captured in terms of the mitigation for the impacts of the local plan growth, and the same applies to doctors' surgeries, same applies to transport upgrades on big kits of big pieces of transport upgrades. Those will all be effectively filtered through the IDP and then reflected in the site-specific development management policies that would come forward in the Reg 19 that would go to inspector. So that means that you can secure delivery of infrastructure at the point of their application coming forward, because they know exactly, the whole point of this, developers know exactly up front what the costs are, what the pieces of kit they're going to have to deliver, what the cost of all that is, and then how much that should be reflected on the land value. Because let's not forget, no developer really buys any land. They've all got option agreements. And the reasons they do that, they don't know what the costs are going to be loaded onto them. They just get an option. They're the preferred partner. And then the negotiations, they don't secure a land value until they've actually gone through the application process, dealt with the Section 106, looked at the contributions that they're going to be liable for, and that gets then reflected in terms of what they should be paying for the land. It's only I would say, a silly developer that will buy land up front at current market value without knowing what applies to the site and what costs should be loaded to.
This doesn't really. I appreciate your answer, but it doesn't address the issue we have with sites that come forward outside of the plan. So if you've got sites that come outside of the plan that come up as general planning applications, they're still not statutory consultees, and the principle that I'm talking about still exists. What shouldn't those developments also be contributing to the cost of the infrastructure that they are a burden upon?
And they you know, you can facilitate kind of like co-payments, bring forward upgrades in combination with water companies, but it's quite complicated to do that. But you can also, you know, if the capacity isn't there, you can also have kind of grampian conditions, so that development can't come forward until the infrastructure is in place.
I think the point the Councillor Hood is making is somewhere in the decision-making process of this policy that should be pointed out. Okay. I've tried to cover it to an extent in 99A, but back on 96, Councillor Hood.
How difficult is it to attain one of those grampian conditions?
It would have to be proved that there isn't capacity in the network. But we know that. So when we have conversations with the water providers, we, you know, as part of the local plan, for example, we'll provide, you know, a scenario and we'll say, okay, look, this is where we're thinking about that development could be located. Do you have capacity within your network for us to be able to deliver growth in those locations? And they will come back to us and say, yes, this in this way, even work capacity here. We're nearing capacity here. So we take account of all of that as part of plan making. We haven't been told, you know, as part of the work and as we've presented in the IDP, there haven't been any issues necessarily flagged in terms of bringing forward the growth that we've looked at. We will work again with those work again with the water companies to iron those out. And obviously, if something is then identified in terms of a capacity issue, then we will work with the water company to understand how development can come forward, because they can't block development. You know, you need to look for solutions in order to bring growth forward. That's their role in order to provide those services.
So I understand that there's a duty to connect. What I'm struggling with is how, if they're not, if you've got a planning application which isn't part, so it's outside of the local plan, you've got a planning application, the water companies, neither of the water companies are statutory consultees. How do we as members ascertain whether or not there's sufficient capacity in the infrastructure to be able to challenge and to ascertain whether or not we require a grampian condition?
In terms of if we've got a sort of an understanding that there are key in terms of mitigating its own impact, because let's not forget, building control deals with connection to a sewer, access to a potable supply is dealt with under the Water Industries Act. So both areas technically are outside the planning. Now, where planning comes into is where you've got an existing capacity issue, an existing situation. So how is the developer going to mitigate that impact, knowing that that's there? So in a planning application, you may have a strategy of how they're going to deal with it. So you may have, you know, they may front load it. So instead of dealing with it necessarily by condition, because remember, some water companies, you know, we're not, if it's not dealt with by building control, if it's not dealt with by the water company, then we're not experts in terms of sewage, in terms of capacity for lines. It's an engineering role. But where we know that's an issue, you may ask for a sewage infrastructure capacity. So what you'll do is, how does the scheme that you're submitting going to mitigate the impact, i.e., are they proposing to have extra lengths of pipe work? Are they proposing to have a tank to discharge at a lower level, you know, during off-peak periods? How are they proposing to deal with that issue? Because what they can only do is deal with their own issues. They can't control the pipe work, and planning can't control the pipe work. That's either building control or someone else. But we can deal with actually, You know, are they going to hold it on site, discharge it later? Now that would deal with the situation to mitigate that particular development. It won't deal with the existing situation, but that's what the legislation says they have to do. So it won't deal with, because that's the undertaker's responsibility. You know, a private developer can't say to them, I'll rip up your network and provide new pipework to get my development scheme moving. That's not their responsibility. Their responsibility is actually discharge rates are going to be a problem. It's going to cause a massive backup. Okay, they've got to provide the capacity on their site to manage that. And as I said, that could be a holding tank, but that would be dealt with through a strategy through the planning application. And that's where, you know, Kelly refers to a Grampian condition. If it's a major issue, you may be dealing with that up front. Hopefully it might be addressed through a pre-application discussion if you know there's a big issue. Or if you haven't dealt with it, members have got grave concerns about it, you might ask for that strategy to come forward as part of the planning application. And you know, if you're dealing with like Grampian, I sort of urge on the cautionary side sometimes, because you know that may change the design or layout of a scheme, because if you've got to have a big holding tank to cover depending on the size of your development, then that may change positioning on site, and you may not have a house above a holding tank. So, you know, developers will normally have that, will know that up front, and will be sort of building that into their scheme layout. Otherwise, they've got to come through the whole planning system again. If they've got to change the layout, they've got to submit another application. So it depends. There's no one scenario that fits all.
Thanks. Good.
But I don't know if we want to go into necessarily, because that's more of a DM function than a local plan matter. And I don't want to get sidetracked because we're only on 100 questions.
Yeah, I was just going to say that whilst they're not a statutory consultee for a planning application, they can still be a consultee. So if there is an issue with a development or an application, then they can still, you know, be consulted, and also they can still respond to that consultation on that application and provide the advice. But, you know, if there is an issue and it's stopping development coming forward, then a developer can also look at those solutions James has spoken to, but they can also look at upgrades as well. So, you know, there not being capacity isn't a reason to stop development, because that's the way that the system works, unfortunately, which is beyond our control. But there are ways that you can deal with that, either through mitigation, or you could at the timing of that development come forward, depending on the upgrades that are needed.
Okay, I'm going to try and move it on, but I want to express a degree of sympathy, because I don't think you can detach an application outside the planning system, outside of the local plan rather, because in my simple mind, yes, they could contain it on site, but they can't control what is required in. So, for example, you still need to connect 1,000 houses to a water supply, and you could control that by saying, sorry, only every other house can use the tap every other hour or something like that. And the same applies to traffic. You can stop traffic going out, there'd be an uproar, but if you try to stop traffic going in, there'd be a traffic jam. So the real world does come into this. And I think all that we're saying, and we've got to move on from it, is that being able to quantify what the problems are at the time when you're trying to make a decision about the impacts of a particular application isn't unreasonable. So, Councillor Tanner.
Just briefly, I still feel really strongly that this consultation is our opportunity to stress to the government the problems that not just our borough are facing. Some boroughs in the country don't have this issue, but we do. Tunbridge Wells should be doing the same. But, you know, Sevenoaks, Medway, whoever else, they should all be doing the same, to say that in our area, this isn't working. You know, people can't get clean water. We're not a third world country. We should have clean water. So I would really like us to stress this in this consultation response. Thank you.
Take that away and discuss it with Eleanor under her powers, as a concern raised dramatically by the committee. So I did try to address it under 1996A, but Councillor Thorneybold.
I mean, it's, the bottom line is, as I understand it, it's this, right? Everyone has a has a right to connect to the water supply, and it can't be denied by any mechanism. Is that right? And in relation to sewerage, the same position?
Dealt with through building regs in terms of connection to public sewers. Yeah.
If
So,
there are,
it would dealt with be through the building
if
act.
public sewers are available.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it has to be dealt with how they're going to deal with sewage disposal. So that's covered under the building act.
There's nothing to stop you doing cesspools, is there?
Depends where how the connection works, but again, as I said, it's a matter that will be covered under the building act, under the connection of, you know, whether you're connecting to a main supply or whether you're doing a cesspool, septic tank. You know, the building act will look at how you're going to connect it and make sure that whatever you are doing is in accordance with the regulation. But again, you know, they don't control how you connect. It's a question of that you have to show how you're doing it to make sure there's adequate provisioning regulation.
I mean, I don't want to go off on a red herring, Mr. Chairman, but I recall years ago that development was refused in Eccles because it was considered to be a water gathering ground. If you had lots of cesspools, it would interfere with the water supply. I don't know if that is still a relevant consideration.
You know, we know because the planning form 1 says how you're going to deal with your foul water supply. So effectively in the form 1 of the application, it either says cesspool, and certain councils have policies that, you know, we haven't advocated that, but certain councils will have policies to say that you know, we'll only permit development to a main supply. We won't, you know, it depends on the situation in your area, whether you've got sensitive areas where cesspools effectively may leak into the soils and contaminate water supply. So it's dependent on the specific circumstances. We don't have that particular policy, but yes, you can have it, and therefore your application, if you're going to propose a septic tank when your policy says it should only connect to the main supply, you would refuse the application because they haven't provided they'd have to put a private connection to link in. So you can do it, but I suppose what I'm saying is that is governed principally the connection by the Building Act.
Councillor Banks.
Right, as David's been talking about clean water, I'll have a quick moment on wastewater. Later on, we're going to be talking about the natural environment and how the local plan impacts upon the natural environment. So I just wondered, from the point of view of, I have a feeling that there's quite a lot of water maybe not treated the way wastewater that it should be, that goes into our water courses. And so there is an issue there that comes up in the press. And I must admit, I do a bit of water testing myself on this subject. So do you get a report in planning from the point of view of what the condition is basically of the water courses that are affected by wastewater coming from development? Because I think the whole thing is, you're saying that we've only got a small responsibility, but we've got another responsibility, which is basically the natural environment, and that's a direct impact on it. So we should be, or you should be getting and talking to us about the result of what comes out of the pipe.
Yeah, I think as part of the Water Framework Directive, there's a push that developments that take place don't make the situation worse, and actually we will look to improve the quality of water. So how that's achieved, you've got a development which is near to a stream or water course, then obviously the development will need to prove that it's not going to be kind of adversely affecting. Actually, it looks to improve that water quality. Now, obviously, you've spoken about in terms of sewage. That is something partly beyond our control, and again, that's the wastewater company. However, obviously, you're looking at wastewater capacity again to treat that wastewater, and that's something again that we look at as part of the local plan, so that there's capacity at the wastewater treatment works to deal with it.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to 97. 98. Right, and we come to 99. First line Kelly and James. I like the way it's written, but I don't think you meant it that way. It says we disagree with paragraph 2 as this policy. Applicants should be required to demonstrate the need for water infrastructure. I think you meant should not. I'll let you take that away because I think the point of the discussion we're just having is the fact that you don't think they should. Perhaps I'm wrong. Anyway, I mean, take that point away. I'm just along the lines of what we've discussed earlier. It was something I wrote down, believe it or not, earlier. The water, I wanted added, the water suppliers should need to demonstrate that there is not a need for significant additional water-related infrastructure. And if there is, they should define the mechanisms by which the required improvements will be raised or made. And so, which is the point I was trying to get at. They should actually say, definitely there isn't, for what reasons there isn't, or if there is, how they're going to deal with it.
If that's a proposal, I'll second it.
So I'll hand this over afterwards. What I've said is that well, water suppliers should need to demonstrate that there is not a need for significant additional water-related infrastructure. That's in and out. And if there is, they should define the mechanisms by which the required improvements will be realised. Yeah. You let me get there earlier.
Yeah.
Right. Section chapter 11. What are we calling it, James?
Sorry,
Okay.
we're calling it. Chapter 11 is facilitating sustainable mineral.
Oh, lovely. Right. And this is questions 100 to 113. So off I go again. 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113. Right. And then we're going on to chapter 11, chapter 12, which is making effective use of land, which is questions 114 all the way to 129. Yes. Okay. So 114. It's question 115. I just wrote a comment. Shouldn't we disagree? Because I felt that that's what the comments reflected. But if you could just make that way, see. I just wrote the comment suggests that this is the officer's conclusion. We would want to maintain maximum flexibility. Too prescriptive. Being too prescriptive stops us from deciding how we should best use that land in our location. Right, 116, 117, 18, 9, 20, 21, 122, 123, 124, 5, 6, 127, 28, and 29. Right, so moving on to chapter 13 is protecting the green belt. And starts with 130 and finishes at 145. So 130, 131. I've got one for 132. I'm just asking the question, isn't the criteria of strongly contribute only a test for deciding whether a piece of green belt should become grey belt? And I'm not sure what the issue was that we were raising. I mean, it's only in that context. during the Greenbelt study period, isn't it? So I'm just clarifying. If we agree on that, I'd like you to check if that's the meaning that comes through. Thank you. And under 132, I've got, doesn't S1 footnote 23 replace existing footnote 7? S1 footnote 23 replace existing footnote 7. Yeah, okay. So we are covered in that regard with the loss of footnote 7. And I've got to find the right point, but I've written down under 132, we need to clarify the last line, and I'll put to be or not to be. So if you can just clarify which it is, be or not be. Right. 133. And I've got the question, why are we only partly agreeing? I mean, I'm assuming that you're happy with the policy GB3 and GB4. They are either partly agreeing, fully agreeing. Question. Make it away, please. Right. Quiet time for me. Chapter 14, Achieving Well-Designed Places, starting 145 to 149. So 145, 46, 147, 148, 149. 15 is promoting sustainable transport. That's 150 to Councillor Hood.
Yeah, I've got there's obviously we've got a difference in the previous previously the planning has been the mitigation has been to provide additional road capacity to mitigate the effect of development, and there's a complete swing in terms of expecting active travel and sustainable transport to pick up that mitigation, which I think is the aspiration's great, but in pragmatic terms, it just doesn't. In many cases, it doesn't work. We've seen schemes presented already at Area 1 where we've had mitigation of a cycle scheme which has been deemed to be completely undeliverable, and I think that there's a real problem where developers are going to lean on the county council, and the county council is incapable of being realistic in terms of recognising the severe impact of developments on the local traffic network. And this gives them an out. This gives them an excuse every time. They'll say, that's okay, it's not severe because look, you've got a cycle lane, you've got a bridleway. And it's just not, this isn't up to it. This isn't going to work. We should be identifying that actually there's a problem where replacing one attitude with the opposite is going to leave local planning authorities in a situation where we are giving the green light to developments which are going to fail the residents who live in them. Not everybody can jump on a bike and use an active travel scheme, and we know that's the case.
I'm in real support for that, but I'm assuming we're on 150. Do you have any suggestions as to how we might modify it or twist it or whatever? So I want a bit of time to come back to that.
It's just I've struggled to come up with the formal words because it's such a complex matter. But I think we definitely as a council need to acknowledge that there's a problem here.
We can take that away and work something, because I kind of know where members are coming from. The only difficulty that we have on that is obviously queuing, not a severe impact in terms of roads. And I know that in terms of that's how inspectors interpret, and it's how policy interprets it. So there is a big shift, but we can put in terms of the concerns that are raised, because obviously it already is in the current NPPF in terms of the approach. It's a vision-led approach already in the NPPF. So what they're looking to do is strengthen that. But I think we could put the other side of the coin that whilst the government is moving towards a vision-led approach, there are concerns with that approach going forward, because obviously, whilst there's a transition to a modal shift, you can't force a modal shift, can you? And depending on different situations in the country, car is an important aspect, and not every site is a sustainable site, and not every settlement is a sustainable site. So you're moving to that transition. Sometimes car is the only natural way to deal with it. So I think we'll have to do the response in that way, so that captures the concern that members are raising, and the fact that we're a sort of, we're not a suburb. Well, we are, I suppose, a suburban town, aren't we? In terms of what we've got, we haven't got the greatest transport links. Some of our stations are well connected, but not every area is well connected. So we'll put something together on that, on that format that raises concerns with the approach to a vision-led approach. I think we can accommodate that.
I think that's a really good point, because I think what we're trying to say is that we are dealing with historic towns and villages. We're dealing with architecture was not custom made, that there are impacts which aren't predictable from a distance and from a building within the town, central government. I think something that actually puts it into context will be really appreciated. Yeah.
Very, very valid, everything that you've said. And I particularly emphasize in the rural areas, that is de facto, the car is essential, bikes are a joke. I'd like to see it different, but I can't see how we can actually deliver it.
Councillor Banks. Oh, sorry, Councillor Thornwell.
In London or a big city, I can't see a prospect operating East Peckham or Stansted or East Peckham or Stansted or West Peckham. In very rural areas, it's just not going to happen.
Thank you. I'm going to move on 151. Councillor Hood.
Before we move on, I think it's absolutely essential that when you have developments, that they incorporate the provision of active travel. It's just balancing that with the realism that not everybody's going to be able to use it.
152, 153, 154, 155, 56. Councillor Davis.
Yes, I think there's a slight problem with the beginning of our response. We support paragraphs 1A to C of the policy as drafted. However, paragraph C is muddled. I would suggest that's paragraph D, not paragraph C. If you go back to the MPF.
Thank you. 157. Right, we'll now move on to chapter 16, which is promoting healthy communities. Questions 158 to 164. 158. 159. 160. 161. 162. 163. 164. Chapter 17, which is pollution, public protection and security. Questions 165 to 170. 165. 166. Councillor Taylor.
Been waiting for 165 questions. I would like to see decision-making on contaminated land strengthened. The law says that the developer is principally responsible for safe development of a site, but our response doesn't include the LPA's responsibility to make sure the developer's done it properly. And I'd like to see a form of words that includes the LPA's responsibility.
I think we've dealt with that question previously, haven't we, Mike? In terms of what our statutory responsibility nation. Yeah, I'm like cover that point.
Thank you. I think we're up to 169, 170. And that's 18 now, which is managing flood risk and coastal change. And that's 171 to 178. 171, 172, 173, 174, 175, 17. Is that 175?
175. There are times when watercourses should be returned and culverts taken out and that sort of thing, but there will always be occasions where flood mitigation requires culverting, straightening of watercourses, I would say. Thank you.
I think we'd always take that exception in terms of where national policy comes forward. So I think there is always a degree of, depending on the circumstance of the case, if it's an essential element, I think, you know, we always retain that flexibility. But I think this is around the general emphasis and the guide and where it's heading to. But I don't personally think, you know, we need to reflect that, because we'd always retain that ability as decision maker to take into account that exceptional.
Okay, 176, 178. Up to 19 is conserving and enhancing the natural environment. There's questions 179 to 184. 179, 180. Councillor Hood.
I'm just a bit, well, not a little disappointed that we're not going for 20% whenever we can. If it's possible to that the site can should be delivering that, then I know that the county council's policy is, their ambition has been 20%. So I would have hoped we'd have followed suit.
I know, as I said, don't know whether you've made that representation in the local plan. If you have, that's something that could be taken forward. I think there are reasons why, because potentially mandating a higher BNG provision has other consequences, and some councils go higher. I think Maidstone have gone higher. I think they delivered 20%, but obviously it's local plan viability testing and looking at what impact that does have, and obviously, you know, it does set sort of minimum threshold, so it gives flexibility to councils to go higher, but then there are other consequences, and sometimes they can have a consequence on affordable housing and local plan viability. So we do have to sort of take that into account.
Well, I was going to say, some studies in terms of our viability assessment, there wasn't actually too much difference in terms of the 10%. But obviously there is a difference in land take and what you can achieve as well, because, you know, to achieve on-site biodiversity net gain, really want to be looking and go alongside, you know, the diversity plans, and you really want to be looking at habitats that need to be restored. You don't always have that on every site. But in addition, you know, there's been you know, the national policy position has been 10%. you would have to justify going higher than that as part of any local plan. We would have to look at that if we were to do that. But also with like national policy take that's coming forward, if 10% is going to be in this new MPPF and that's going to be really considered as the new national, you don't really want to be going against that necessarily. But I think here what the government are doing is that they're asking people for their opinion to actually consider it, because they can see differences in the country. So it'd be interesting to see what comes out.
Okay, the wording actually says that there is potential to seek more than 10% BNG on some strategic sized allocation sites allocated within the development plan. I guess that's for us members to note and to push in that direction. But right, 181, 182, 183. Councillor Banks.
I'm not sure whether this point covers is covered in 183 or 184, but really it's an example of biodiversity hotspots and how that fits in from the point of view of, if you get a biodiversity hotspot, which could be derelict land, and there was evidence basically that it was as such, which would take precedence in a planning situation. It could be called grey belt. Suddenly everything is swept away and it's developed, or it's also a biodiversity hotspot, but that happens to be a derelict piece of land that hasn't been used for 30 years, say, just as an example. So how does this policy work from the point of view of identifying new biodiversity hotspots, which are relatively recent?
I mean, ultimately, the assessment come down to whether they're protected. That's where the ultimate, unless it's a designated site like a local nature reserve, and there are procedures and processes around for designating. But ultimately, you know, there are a lot of sites have local nature hotspots, but they may not have protected species on them. And there's a balance to be struck in every planning decision to make. It's not all compliant with the local plan, and you have to do a balancing exercise. You know, what benefits the site, what needs for the infrastructure, needs for housing, vis-a-vis loss of habitat for certain species. But as I said, unless it's a protected, where you may look at translocation, compensation, or mitigation, where you could look at off-site provision. I think that's how you'd have to. But I think.
Moving on, chapter 20, which is conserving and enhancing the historic environment, questions 185 to 193. So 185. One 186, 187, 188, 189, and 90. 191, 192, 193. Right, that's chapter 20. And we go on to Annex A, which is data centres and on-site energy production, which is questions 195 to 199. Not sure why this is an annex rather than just another chapter, but 195, 196, 197, 198, 199. Annex B, which is viability, sorry. Oh dear, oh dear, dear, oh dear. Viability standards, inputs in viability, which is question 200 to 225. So here we go. 200, 201, 202, 203, 204, 5, 06, 07, 08, 09, 210, 211, 212, 213, 214, 215, 216, 7, 8, 9, 20, 221, no, 222, 223, 224, and 225. And finally, we do have Annex 2, which is a risk assessment. I just have one question. Does this risk assessment form part of the response? I thought so. So it's there purely as an informative, is it? It's a quite a comprehensive table, which is quite useful, and in my opinion, repetitive a bit, right? But I can understand it's going to be a basis of quite a lot of conversations, but I'm not sure if anyone wants to talk about it. No, not necessarily.
That's what
I'm just.
I'm happy to.
I'm a very inclusive person. You're in the room.
No.
I'm happy not to talk about it. Right, jolly good.
I'll talk about it.
David.
His mic's off.
Like if they adopted a month before we publish our local plan, there's nothing we can do, is there really? Whereas the report I read, that we will try and, if we have time, we will try and adjust our local plan as far as possible to reflect what's eventually in this document. And it's all uncertain. That's the trouble, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, you know, similar to other occasions when I guess we're facing another new MPPF. Obviously, you know, that will have an effect on plan making, will have an effect on decision making. You know, obviously we've got some transitional arrangements where, you know, we're looking to bring forward a plan under the legacy agreement or the legacy arrangements. And that's discussed as part of this consultation. So that's one of the reasons why we put forward the risk assessment. It is a much updated risk assessment because we have obviously hit a stage in plan making. We've just passed the Reg 18B stage. And I guess it seemed a very good time to bring that risk assessment completely up to date. Apologies that it's slightly repetitive in places, but obviously we have to deal with each risk, and each mitigation for that risk might be connected to another risk. And there are lots of interdependencies in there that we must cover. So I hope that, you know, it provides a full picture of all of the risks that we are going to be facing between now and September. And hopefully that will bring members up to date in terms of where we are and what we need to do to help get through.
Thank you, Kelly. It was meant to be an observation rather than a criticism, honestly. Yeah, and just as a general observation, let's say there are 400 authorities all over the country, all sitting around having evenings like this, all sending in one variation or another of this response, all of which in theory should be read by someone and intelligently absorbed, unless AI has taken over the world. And that should take quite a lot of time. So I don't think it's a small task. I don't think it will be next week that this will come into force, but who knows?
Really, Chairman, I think it will be late spring, early summer, if I'm very honest, which coincides right in bang with our timetable for Reg 19, which, but at least we've got a consultation and a lead-in time, so we know kind of direction, travel, where the government is going, yes, they'll make changes in terms of responses, but there are certain elements in terms of building homes around stations, which I don't think is going to change. Looking at minimum densities around those, well connected, that links in with their sustainability agenda, links in with their delivery to increase home provision. So there are certain elements in there that we really need to take account of to proof our plan, because stuff like there are certain things in here that we don't think will change going forward, because if you want to sort of increase delivery of housing, you've got to have policies that enable greater efficiency of use of land in those kind of areas. So I think that's how we need to look at how we future-proof the plan going forward. And again, whilst we're not going to be effectively plan making under this F, we're plan making under the transitional arrangement. Got to be very wary that we should be taking into account what's coming down the line. So we kind of need to reflect that in terms of how we're looking at spatial strategies going forward, moving into Reg 19, and we've got a plan for that undoubtedly, because that's what is coming down the line, and we want to future-proof our Reg 19 as much as we possibly can within our scope, knowing the fact that we've got sort of an early advance, at least at this stage. So yeah, there is a sort of lot of work, and it kind of leaves a bit of nervousness, if I'm honest. But given the fact that plan making is under the old plan, that should give us the benefits that we just need to move forward with having a plan in place, because there's lots of benefits arising about having a local plan in place as opposed to not having one in place. And especially with LGR on the horizon, do not want to be an authority doesn't have a adopted plan when we go into LGR, especially when you've got the likes of Maidstone who've got one, Tunbridge Wells who have got one, Sevenoaks at the same pace as we are. Do not want to be in a position where you don't have a plan for that organisation, because in my belief, you'll possibly know that what would happen to housing allocations if you haven't got, we're the only one that doesn't have a plan. I'm not trying to scaremonger amongst it, but I personally wouldn't want to be in that, because in my mind it leaves it open. A very old plan, you're going into a new unitary with spatial strategies having to be readopted, looked at. Where's the housing going to go? Where's all that speculative development going? Heads towards an area that hasn't got a plan. But anyway, that's for another day, and we'll go. Thank you.
Right, thank you, James. I'd like to draw your attention back to the recommendations on page 14, which is 3.1. It's in 3 parts, which is asking us to note the contents, which he's obviously done at great length this evening. And it's asking us to improve the Tunbridge and Malling response, which is obviously subject to the changes we've agreed this evening to go forward to Cabinet in a week's time. And it also asks us to allow delegated authority to the Director of Planning, Housing and Regulatory Services to make any minor changes, which is standard practice. But not sure if anything dramatic happened, we would know about it. But that's standard practice, as I say. So really, I'm going to try and do this by general affirmation. And I would propose a recommendation in 3 parts. Can I have a seconder, please? As to see Councillor Davis, and I'll ask for general affirmation. Are we okay with that? Thank you so much. In terms of any urgent items, I have no urgent items. I have no matters for consideration in private. I'd just like to say thank you for responding to the extraordinary requirements of the meeting, as it's an extra scrutiny. I'd just like to say that I'll close the meeting at 5 minutes to 10. Thank you very much. Hope you're impressed with my counting skills.